So some ideas from Furcroft about how we've managed to make our culture, very inclusive. I wouldn't say that, we're 100% there, because I think it's always something that you're striving to be better at. But some of the things that we've done, we went through a very big transformational change. And one of the things that really underpinned our new culture a few years ago was we created a task force that looks at really what our values are at Furcroft. And we came up with 5 different values. One of them being inclusive and diverse. And those values we really have embedded within the organisation in every process and practice that we can. So we wear them on our lanyards. They're up on the walls, as you'd expect. But actually we also recruit to those values. So we ask questions about what people's values are before they even join our organisation, and make it really clear what our values are. So if those don't match, then, at that stage, at the recruitment stage, people can start thinking about that. We've also got one-to-one meetings where leaders meet with their employees and their teams very regularly. And part of that, about a third of that meeting, focuses on behaviour and values. So we ask for examples. How have you lived our values? We've got values cards, as you'd expect, values champions, values awards. So they really are, you can't get away from our values. They really are, embedded everywhere. And I think that really sets those boundaries for people to think about how they're behaving. We also try and create opportunities for everybody. So rather than just having your role, there's a lot of different task and finish groups, or different ways that you can develop yourself and join different groups that are looking at different topics you might be interested in. So we've got an employee voice group, and we've got a champion for each value on there. So if people really have a passion about a certain subject, they can develop themselves outside of their role. We've also got a middle management team that we created to help with succession planning and help diversify our leadership team. We've got a number of other task and finish groups that are created as projects come up. And we work in a fashion which is, I won't go into it today, but it's called sociocracy. And it's something our principal is quite keen on working with. And that is where groups work in a circle, and development opportunities and decisions are devolved. So they don't just sit with the leaders. We really have this devolved decision making that brings people in and allows them to develop. We also encourage a learning culture at Furcroft, so that people can really take ownership of their own professional development. It's something we really reward and recognise, and encourage all of anybody at any level in our workforce. We encourage you to learn, and we make sure that there's funding there for people, and that people can use our own facilities as a college. So we'll have members of our cleaning team will go and do a course at the college. Anybody at any level will go and learn, and that's a really nice way of developing people. We've got an inclusive approach, so we've got an equality, diversity, inclusion champion who reviews different things that we put in place. We're also linked externally to a number of groups. So I do a lot with the Asian Business Chamber of Commerce, for instance, and I linked up with them on a few different projects. But one of the things that they helped us do, just because we have that network, is they helped us to recruit one of our recent governors, to make sure that we're getting a diverse range of governors, which is often an area that companies struggle to get diversity in that area. We also have brave conversations, and we don't shy away from when things happen in the external world and things happen in the press. We open up conversations about that. So we have politics cafes that focus on domestic violence, or climate change, or the Black Lives Matter campaign. And we open up that narrative, just because we might not, people might not always get it right, and they kind of shy away from some of these conversations, but actually really opening up and having space for those is so important. And then we've got a clear strategy which is underpinned by equality, diversity and inclusion. So it's in all, as leaders, it's in all of our objectives to focus on this. Okay, so I think you've heard enough from me for now, so I'm going to hand over to Michael to do this last section.
I think part of Lisa's role is also to get feedback on that. I think it's all very well for us to say that it's inclusive. I think actually, obviously, what you need is feedback from staff on whether that's the the case or not. So there's a questionnaire each year that, for example, asks people whether they understand how their role fits, or you know, as Lisa said, we've got things to work on, and one of them is recognition, and we know that because that's part of that survey, that people think they could be more recognised and rewarded.
That's a good point, Michael, actually. I missed out there that when we do the engagement survey, I do break it down by protected characteristics and try and identify if there is gaps there. And I think that's really important, because what one group of people might feel might not be the same as what another group of people might feel. And it's very interesting to look at that difference.
So I thought the last thing we might look at would be our style. So it's not just about style. We looked at that whole sort of cultural mix, including policies and so on. But I think style is quite important and not easy to reflect on. So that's why we sent a link to a questionnaire. Don't worry if you haven't done it. I'm just going to get everybody on my screen. Can I see most people? So could you just give me a thumbs up if you had, don't worry if you didn't, a thumbs up if you had time to do the questionnaire. So you could give me a thumbs up on the photo, or, oh, that tells me enough. Okay, that's fine. So if afterwards, if you want to go back to the invitation and do it for yourself, a questionnaire is always quite handy, because it comes at the model in a different way, and you can't sort of fiddle the result. But I'll just spend a bit more time introducing it, so that if you haven't done the questionnaire, this will still make sense. So, I mean, there's so many models of leadership, and quite a few of them are to do with the degree to which you empower. And I think that's a sort of key word for inclusive leadership, the extent to which you're giving away the power that would otherwise be yours, so that leadership is dispersed, maybe even to the point where you become a servant leader. These are all different models of leadership. So you get different combinations of words, and here we've got 6 descriptors. So on the one end we've got coercive leadership, and each of these there's quite a handy phrase just to capture what that sort of leader would be saying. So a coercive leader is saying, do what I tell you. That's not the same as an authoritative leader. So an authoritative leader is giving you a vision, actually, and saying, come with me. An affiliative leader is one who's always saying that that people come first, and how people are feeling about a situation is really, really, really important. So a democratic leader would be the one who'd be saying, what do you think? Might even introduce a mechanism like sociocracy, which Lisa mentioned. A pace setter, so that's somebody who's racing on ahead and is saying, follow me, as in sort of do what I do and do it now. They're in a hurry. And then we know what a coach is. So a coach is making suggestions, saying, try this, not do this, try this, see if it works. So hopefully, if you didn't do the questionnaire, I've said just enough about those for you to have a bit of a view on where you might sit with this. So we've got 3 questions in a poll, and we'll just look at the answers to each question as we go through, just to see the styles that come to us naturally, and which ones might really help us if we want to be inclusive leaders.
Okay, I've launched poll number 1, so hopefully you'll be able to see that on your screen. It's multiple choice, so you can select more than one. And it's, what do you feel are your most developed leadership styles? Okay, just a couple more seconds. Right, so I'm going to end the polling there and share the results with you.
Okay, so it's interesting. So everybody in the group sees themselves as democratic. So this is about your most developed style. It's not saying which one's right or wrong, but we're obviously in this webinar. It's interesting. We've attracted everybody who's wants to be, oh, sorry, who thinks that they are democratic. Coaching is also very high. Affiliative, 2 out of 5. So nobody's got coercive. It's not an attractive word, and you're not saying that's your most developed style. The key thing here, I think, is that we're acknowledging our preferences, really. These are likely to be the styles that have worked for us, that we fall back on. And I think it's always important to notice what our instincts are as leaders. But sometimes it's important because that isn't going to be necessarily the best style, and we need to sort of catch ourselves and not just act out of instinct and deliberately think, well, you know, it might be easier for me to do this, but I'm not actually sure that's the best thing for the situation. And it might be, you know, we carry on developing our leadership. So actually, we can have a bit of a discussion about this later. You know, if none of us are coercive at the moment, actually, should that be a style of leadership that we need to develop a little bit? And we'll come back to that. So let's look in the next poll at the situation that is going to be most suitable in the current situation. So we need the second poll. Yeah. So by the current situation, I mean, it would be good actually to think about lockdown and coming out of lockdown, and quite a few of us are working in schools and colleges, or for your if you think about where your organisation is just at the moment, what style do you think is going to fit that best?
Okay, just a few more seconds on that poll. There we go, and I'll share those results.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I'm sure if we unmuted, you'd all have interesting things to say about this. So I'm just sharing the things that strike me. So, so somebody is thinking there is a place for a coercive approach in here, and actually, I completely see that. I think you know, there is a place for coercion. We'll see in a minute. We'll reveal another line on this grid, but I think coercive could be appropriate in an emergency situation. So I do remember, so we closed the college a week before we were supposed to, against the advice of the DFE, something I think we're quite proud about now, because as it turned out, the government were a bit slow. But actually, I think we were clearly led to that decision by a very strong view of the chief exec. And I think she should be very proud of that, really. And I don't know if she'd want to be called coercive. I don't think she would. But actually, I think there's a time for, in an emergency, I think there is a place for very clear decision making. And if that doesn't come naturally to us, then there might be situations in which we need to do that. I'll go through each of them so I don't forget to say anything. So we've got pace setting here. What's interesting overall, I mean, I'm saying none of these are good or bad, but they measured the effect on culture of each of these. And actually, the only one that had a negative effect, which is really interesting, is the pace setting one, which I think is quite a surprise. I think it's probably because you get a sort of short-term gain, but if people can't keep up, then that's not sustainable. And again, you could definitely argue there's a point in a crisis when it's good to have a pace setter, I suppose. I think it's possibly more useful when an organisation's got a bit stuck, and actually the pace is so slow that you need somebody to pick it up a bit. Authoritative, you remember, was about a vision. I think that's probably where we are now. Again, I've talked too much about Furcroft. Your organisations might be in different situations, but I think a lot of us are now looking ahead to the autumn. And is this just about getting the show back on the road, or actually do we need to emphasise what is unique about what we do? Are we going to focus so much on what we've lost and all the things we can't do and we can't offer? I mean, that's not a vision, is it really? And actually to have a new vision that says, okay, well, we can't exactly do what we used to do, but we can do some really special things, and maybe we're going to do some different things, and actually some of them are quite exciting, and we can sort of rebrand ourselves. I think so 2 out of the 5 of you have got authoritative there. I think I definitely see a role for somebody who sets the vision. Affiliative, I'm not surprised that's our most popular one, isn't it? So that's about taking people with us. Certainly up till this point, I think that has been absolutely crucial, isn't it? I mean, this must be where the belonging comes in, and so I think we put a lot of energy into finding ways in which different people could still belong and feel affiliated, and it is different for different people. So it's really interesting who comes to weekly catch-ups, who comes to something recreational like a quiz or a treasure hunt, who's most comfortable on WhatsApp. And we invested quite a lot, getting people phones, not to interact with our clients, but just to stay in touch with the college and with their colleagues. So affiliative's definitely there. Democratic, so that's sharing the decision making. Again, maybe being really clear who's still making the decision. So are you handing over the decision, or are you making a more informed decision because everybody else has said what they said? So we'll talk more about this on part 2 about people sharing in decision making. But certainly part of that could be crucial at the moment. Certainly the bit that's about the people who are closest, who know the most, being part of the decision, because actually there's no leader at this sort of remove trying to do everything virtually who could be making reliable decisions without consulting. So consultation's part of this, isn't it? And nobody's got coaching here, so you've totally got this. So although for a lot of you this was your preference, I think you're completely right that just at the moment, coaching is quite a long-winded way of getting there. helping people think it through is a long-term investment. I mean, hopefully, if you'd already made the investment, you're going to reap the benefits now because people are working things out for themselves. But if not, I think you know, everybody who's working at the moment is you know, very stretched, and I'm not sure there's a lot of headspace for being coached or for coaching. So that's really, it's really interesting, and to contrast your answers to those two. So then the final question is relating it specifically to inclusive leadership.
Sorry, let me just start the poll number 3. Here we go. Right, there we go. So there's 30 seconds or so to fill out that last poll, which is about which style is most inclusive out of those styles. So which of those styles do we think includes the most people, or is the most inclusive for people? Okay, I'm just going to do another 10 seconds or so with that. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so does anyone want to unmute and just, rather than me speculate, which might get a bit irritating, do people who answer definitive or democratic just want to tell us why?
I think for me, it depends on which sort of stakeholder group you're talking about. But if we don't know what's going on across our whole 750 staff business, we're going to stand a really good chance of messing something up. So if we're not getting stakeholders that represent all of those parts of the business, and it's even harder when you're trying to work remotely, when you've got technicians who don't do technology very well, and leaders who think everybody does very well when they don't. If you're not actually creating opportunities and spaces for that feedback, and in a safe environment which isn't safe, and you've got radiation to deal with and other things, you know, critical safety issues. But yeah, it really depends. It changes. It changes. But I think the democratic way, right at this moment, before people go back, is possibly the most important. I don't think our people would believe that we're being genuinely inclusive if we try to go down that route now.
That's interesting.
It's a shame that it was not a multiple choice, because it will really depend on situation, and I think because the team is diverse, it will also because some people may feel less motivated than the others, so that you want to have one approach with them, and obviously their views are important in order to shape the future service delivery, or maybe rebranding, or take all of that their views into consideration.
Yeah. There's a couple of great points I'll come back to. Anybody else want to just chip in, or? Yeah, so just on those two, I think so. I think democratic is an ongoing one. It was actually in that sort of top 3 from Deloitte, which we'll come back to, that people need to feel that they've had a say in the decision, quite apart from getting to better decisions, which would be difficult at the moment if you didn't consult. And then I think that's a really good point about the fact that we actually want to adapt our leadership style, not just to the whole situation, but to the individual. So in a way, you've sort of shown up a slight flaw in this third question, really, that you're right, you should be able to tick all 5 or 6, because actually with individual members of staff, if we're getting down to that level, you might need to adopt, you're quite right, any one of these 6 styles, because what motivates people or how people need to be motivated at certain points will depend a lot on where they are, and some people might need coaching, and some people might be looking for a vision, or some people perhaps because of the baggage that we carry, they just need to hear the affiliation at this point. So I think that's an excellent point. So I think I just want to emphasize a few things, maybe in the ones you haven't chosen. I'll have one go now, and then I'll see if there's a later slide that would also help me. Just the things I would pick out would be that around authoritative, there is something around confidence. So if you read the literature on inclusive leadership, it's not all sort of warm and fuzzy. There's quite an edge to some of it, and one of them is definitely about the leader being confident. Another one is actually, it's interesting, it's about making people accountable, which sounds sort of managerial and the opposite of inclusive, but it's not really, because what it's doing is it's really giving people credit and a clear idea about what they're trying to achieve, and actually a sense of achievement, because we believe they're going to get there. And if you don't make people accountable, it's really hard. It's really hard to do that. And certainly, I think coaching long term would definitely be one of them, because again, inclusion is about developing everything. We talked a lot about developing the organisation and the culture, and it's also definitely about developing individuals, which I think we're doing all the time, not necessarily through formal coaching, but through sort of coaching conversations and helping people to become more resourceful. Let's just see if the subsequent slides just add anything to that as we come to an end. So, if it's all very well saying we should have more styles. One way we can develop them is everybody seeing the results of the poll still, Lisa, or is that just me?
Oh, they're not on my screen anymore, are they?
Oh, okay, right. Let me just... all right, I've got rid of it.
Hold on, there we go.
That's just me. So it might be just helpful to know that the questionnaire you took and those headings are based on a leadership style that's got emotional intelligence behind it, so EI. And if you're familiar with it, there's sort of 4 parts to that. So the way we can develop the other styles is by looking at self-awareness and self-management and social awareness and social skills. And I think on the next slide, I've just highlighted, these ones. So I think, again, this is open for discussion, but I think these are some of the key ones to do with being more inclusive. So I mentioned about a self-confidence, organizational awareness. I think that's really important. There is a sort of systems bit to this as well. So otherwise, what we're doing is we're saying one thing and the organization's doing another. And then I've got developing others. Oh, change is really important. So I don't think inclusive leadership is leaving people or leaving the organisation where it was. So if you read the literature, that's there. Yeah, building bonds is your affiliative bit, and then somebody very early on mentioned collaboration. Perhaps it was in my group, and I think collaborations are really a key thing. So these are areas that we could work on. So if you when you first looked at the stars or you did the questionnaire and you think, oh, I need to develop some of the other ones, then this is a way you can approach it. And there's a useful article that we can give you a link to do that.
Thanks, Michael. So this is just one of the last slides now, as we come to a close. And this was taken from an article, again, it was in Harvard Business Review, and it was Bork and Esposito in 2019. And they looked at a lot of different models of inclusive leadership. And what they came up with was these 6 points that they feel that if you're an inclusive leader, this is what they've narrowed it down to, that they think inclusive leaders portray. So inclusive leaders portray a visible commitment. So they articulate authentic commitment to diversity, and they challenge the status quo. They hold each other to account, and they make diversity and inclusion a personal priority. They have humility, so they're modest about their capabilities, and they admit mistakes. So they create a space for others to contribute. And I imagine by that a kind of safe place for people to take risks as well, if people aren't afraid to make mistakes. They're aware of their bias, so they show awareness of personal blind spots as well as flaws in the system, and they work hard to ensure meritocracy, so that people are given work or achieve things based on their own merit. They're curious about others, so they demonstrate an open mindset and a deep curiosity about others. They listen without judgment, and they seek empathy to understand those around them. They show cultural intelligence, so they're attentive to others' cultures and they adapt as required. And they're effective collaborators, so they empower others and they pay attention to diversity of thinking and psychological safety, and they focus on team cohesion. I thought that was a nice model to end on. So we're coming to the end of our session now. We've left a few minutes because we wanted to see whether anybody does have any questions or does want to raise anything that we haven't covered throughout this workshop. So feel free, you can put your hand up if you want to, or just unmute yourselves and talk up. Well, we must have done a fabulous job if nobody has any questions.
It was a good short presentation, and thank you. I enjoyed it.
Good, thank you for the feedback. Has anybody else got any questions or anything they wanted to bring up before we end the session?
No. Sorry.
Go on, Julie.
I looked back and thought about 3 things that that I wanted from the session, and you covered those 3 things. It hasn't been so conceptual. You didn't think about it's head and heart, right? Often I go to things. I went to a Deloitte thing yesterday. It was all head stuff, and then you go into meetings and you watch people exclude each other all over the place, you know, having learned all the theory. So I really like the balance between the head and the heart. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. That's really good feedback. Is there anybody else?
It'd be interesting to know what people have on their list for next time. So obviously, we think what we're going to cover, and I think we've sent you the bullets. But since you're coming back for part 2, it would be interesting to know if there's anything you particularly want us, you know, as a group to spend more time on.
I actually missed the fact that this is a two-part series. I didn't realise there was a second one. I'll have to go back and read more carefully.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we're doing it as a standalone session as well. So what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to email everybody that was due to attend and everybody that has attended, and I'll send you the link for the second part of the session if you do want to book on. Just to say, in that session we're covering inclusive practices and the impact that those have on equality, diversity and inclusion, the benefits and the challenges of the current climate, and influencing and managing change. So there's a lot more about change management as well in the next session. So it would be great if you did book on. It'd be lovely to see you there, but don't worry if the time doesn't work for you, or if you just want to sign up for a recording, that's fine as well. I'll also email around an evaluation form, so if you wanted to fill out and give us some feedback, not necessarily in front of everybody, if you want to give us some feedback, we'd be really happy to receive that, even if it's constructive criticism. Okay. So if there's nothing else from you, Michael, I'm going to end the recording.
Yep.
Okay. Let me just stop.